Hey, what's up guys, aarava here, bringing you another Let's Talk F1 video here today to round up the tech of week number 2 in the final week of F1 testing 2019. And actually in week 2, apart from the Mercedes car, which obviously we covered in a previous video, calling it the Mercedes b-spec car earlier in the week, there wasn't actually that many tech updates for all the teams. I think it's very apparent that the teams have been squeezed quite a fair bit for development for testing. You know, testing is earlier this year than it was last year. The entire season begins a little bit earlier than it was last season, so I think a lot of teams have kind of been a little bit struggling, you know, for basically bringing developments to testing. We've seen Force India and Perez admit last week that they just don't have enough parts and that pretty much their car is still properly being built back at the factory for when it turns up for race spec in Melbourne. So a lot of teams really haven't changed too much, apart from, like I said, Mercedes, and even these small little tech updates I'm going to go through in the video aren't really that major. And this first one, we start off with the Alfa Romeo team, is one I mentioned in the midweek kind of news video I did, where we talked about Fernando Alonso bouncing around in the paddock. In that, just to explain that Alfa Romeo had a very similar kind of area of the car development like Mercedes. So Mercedes had those kind of horns on their new B-spec car, and Alfa Romeo have come through with this very unique and very stylized kind of concept in the same area of the car, of these 4 little upright deflectors, and they're very sculpted in a way to carefully deflect air towards the outside of the chassis and try and keep the air coming out of the S-duct as clean as possible. You can see this is the S-duct opening, quite a large opening for Alfa Romeo, and that's injecting fresh air from the nose area of the car. And that injection of air on the very top is meant to try and mix the boundary layer of air on the very top of the chassis, try and keep it all attached to the top of the chassis. And so all this air on the sides is quite turbulent, especially the ones, the air that's hitting the edge of the nose, and it's going to be cascading a little bit. And so to deflect that air away and towards the barge area instead, where it can be kind of conditioned a little bit better on the kind of streaks that Alfa Romeo have got that go down towards the inlet, they're going to try and deflect that air through, and that allows you to get also some better cooling, perhaps, you know, get more air directly into that cooling. As you can see, the kind of way it's been directed is literally towards this winglet they've got that streaks down in the direction of this very small inlet they've got. A lot of teams have got the small inlets here, so very nice solution for Alfa Romeo there, and even a bit more kind of even complicated, I guess you could say, compared to Mercedes solution of just 2 little L-shaped uprights. So again, Alfa Romeo trying to, you know, be a bit you know, inventive in a way, and trying to, you know, go chuck as many ideas as they can to try and become that 4th best team as they battle, I guess, for Renault. Obviously, only time will tell if they can actually make that step up to the yellow outfit. Speaking of the yellow outfit, actually, there was some comparison actually between the brake ducts of a lot of the cars, and tech guys at the paddock have noticed that the Renault car is actually running a much chunkier brake duct compared to the likes of McLaren, Red Bull, which pretty much have a signal in this solid yellow line. It's pretty much the thickness of the McLaren or Red Bull brake ducts, and the Renault one, you can see, sprouts out quite largely, got a lot of ventage there. So there's no more blown wheel nuts in F1, they're kind of banned, but what people think they're doing is essentially forcing the air through the actual hub itself, because we've seen these little ducts in the hubs. We've seen it with the rear wheels. Obviously that's been plenty with Mercedes, Ferrari, McLaren doing some clever stuff with the hubs on the rear wheels, trying to help out in terms of the tyre wear and the way the tyres react. But at the same time, on the front wheels, you've got these little ducts in the hub that are just jetting air out of the actual hubs themselves rather than the wheel nut, which has been banned outright. So Renault definitely going for that, and other teams not really bothering really, and just going for a smaller duct. Obviously, the only caveat is here is a bit of a bluff object, so you're going to get some turbulence off the actual sides of this brake duct. So that's the only kind of downside, perhaps, compared to other teams which have gone for a smoother kind of, you know, much thinner brake duct, just to let the air pass through and just kind of, you know, graze it basically, essentially, rather than actually going right in and going into all these little intricate little tunnel systems. We move to what seems to be the top team, Ferrari. Hamilton has been saying that Ferrari definitely are ahead. We saw Ferrari unfortunately have a few reliability issues in the last 2 days, especially on this last day. They pretty much gave up with I think it was a electrical fault, I want to say, because Red Bull had a gearbox issue that had them out with Verstappen, and I think it was an electrical issue with Ferrari, so they gave up quite actually quite fairly relative early on in afternoon today on Friday in testing the last day. So that's going to be a worry for them a little bit, perhaps, because Haas have also had a lot of failures as well in terms of, well, not failures, reliability issues, I guess, and stoppages in testing. So that'll be the only kind of chink in Ferrari's armor, I guess. But Hamilton did set some faster times on this last day and got within like a tenth or even less to Vettel's time on the same set of tyres. So that will be the big question mark for Melbourne. So finally, Mercedes now shown their hand a little bit on this last day, and maybe that Mercedes car is closer than we think. But at the same time, a lot lot of people think that Ferrari are holding back. Leclerc said he was not pushing on his lap. He did yesterday, so that is something to encounter. In terms of upgrades to the Ferrari car, for week 2, they did have some small updates at the very beginning of the week, and the second half of the week, they brought these updates to the floor. You got these 3 upright deflectors on the very edge of the floor, just ahead of the rear tire. You can see the way they shape down, trying to deflect air to the left-hand side, to the outside. You got the squirt slot gaps, jetting air towards that inside face, and then it's not a new upgrade. Ferrari had this a little bit before, but just nice detailing. You can see from this photo of these little flicks and deflectors trying to curl the air a little bit away from the actual rear wing end plate itself, because this is the section in between the rear tire and the front wing, which I've said before, you know, they're trying to get as much air flowing through there to create a bit of a vacuum seal between that area of the car, because you've got the diffuser pretty much the width of the rear wing, and that needs to work as efficiently as possible, and having this air kind of jetting in from the side isn't going to help unless it's kind of cubbied away in between these two areas to try and create that seal in a way. And then this will be more kind of getting air around the outside of the rear tire and trying to shape that airflow as it goes off the actual back end there, and trying to get it away from what they're trying to do with actual slot gaps and the proper detailing on the floor here. And you can see the actual Flovis paint, you can see the little shards of paint coming through towards this back end there. So, you know, working well, clearly the Ferrari car, but wanting to test it out with that Flovis paint, but just some nice detailing on the Ferrari car. Just a quick reminder, if you didn't see the Mercedes B-spec video uploaded earlier today, if you're on your own idea, I do suggest you go check that video out about the Mercedes B-spec. So yeah, just basically a reminder, like I said, of the different parts. You've got the different winglets on the side of the chassis, the winglet on the actual halo itself. Those are the uprights I was talking about in the same area as the Alfa Romeo. Again, basically on the side of the S-duct itself, so trying to keep air away and stop interrupting the S-duct's workflow, essentially. And then, like we said, the nose cone, which has been kind of actually tightened a little bit before getting elongated, and just to help that cape, you can see right there, the cape shaping as it goes from the nose into the snowplow cape underneath the car, and trying to help the airflow around that area, trying to chuck it towards the barge wall and underneath the car directly in that area, just creating better efficiency, essentially, really, which is kind of a lot of what Mercedes need to do, is efficiency and better handling of the entire car. Hamilton, like I said, still maintains Ferrari are ahead. Bottas still said there needs to be some sorting out still of the handling issue. So it looks like perhaps, you know, I think Mercedes, again, will, like we've mentioned on the podcast last week, will be on a knife edge. I feel like it's a car that, again, does maybe have the potential to get up to speed, but Hamilton, Bottas are finding it tricky to get into that zone, perhaps, compared to the Ferrari, which is very easy to get into that zone. So I think in Mercedes, I think for Melbourne, for Mercedes, we'll see what upgrades they bring for Melbourne. I'll be doing a video on Friday of the Australian Grand Prix to bring you any tech updates for Friday, because there'll be definitely a lot for a lot of the midfield teams, perhaps, for their kind of proper race spec. But that will be the real big impetus for Mercedes. You know, how do they look on the actual long run pace on Friday at Melbourne compared to Ferrari for the real first time, because we just really can't tell how much they're sandbagging and how much it is genuine, because Hamilton's, you know, done this before. He said before Ferrari are faster, and then he turns up and it goes faster. We've had it all before in the last 2 seasons. I find it one for one a little bit, you know, hard to swallow completely yet, so don't get too excited yet. That's going to be a really tight battle. You just don't know how close they're holding their cars to their chests. But that is pretty much the noteworthy tech updates, I guess you could say, for week 2. Like I said, not a lot actually compared to previous seasons of week 2 testing. But like I said, this week 2 was pretty much a lot earlier than week 1. Well, pretty much when week 1 was, in a way, or halfway through, or halfway done of week 1 of last year, because everything got moved forward. The Australian Grand Prix dates are moved forward. So I think just a lot of teams were turning up and just working reliability rather, and the actual setup work of the car rather than actual new aero upgrades. Just the actual way that, you know, tweaking the different parts they can of the car to get the setup dialed in a little bit more for long runs and short runs. You know, we've seen some pretty good reliable running for a lot of the midfield teams. The top teams, actually, you know, they've had a few stoppages, so that'll be the only kind of question mark for them in terms of going to Melbourne, of shaking off those gremlins. You got Red Bull with the gearbox issue, like I said, Ferrari with the electrical issue. We had Mercedes earlier on the week with, I think it was an oil pressure issue, an oil or engine issue, basically, of something leaking, and so Bottas only got 7 laps earlier on Tuesday. So there's definitely a lot of, you know, tech gremlins to kind of iron out for the top teams and the midfield, because Haas stopped plenty as well, and McLaren a few times have gone, fast and then stopped again with the red flag straight after they've gone for a fast run. So there's still some kinks to iron out, and from a contrasting week 1 of quite bulletproof reliability for a lot of people, week 2's definitely been harder for a lot of teams. We saw Gasly also crash out, which didn't help Red Bull guys. So it'll be interesting. I think Melbourne is going to be definitely a plethora of tech updates. It's going to be really cool, because last year we got a few, but not too many really, actually, in all honesty. So I think this year Melbourne could be a very exciting time for Friday in terms of getting nerdy and looking at all the tech. But guys, if you did enjoy this video and found it somewhat informative, then be sure to hit that like button. Let me know what you thought in the comments below, and who do you fancy at the moment, and just who's your money on. And like I said, if you are new around here, do get subscribed for weekly Formula 1 content. I've been around for 100 today, and I'll see you guys next time. Goodbye.